On behalf of the National Eczema Association, I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar Wednesday presentation, Eczema-Diet Mythbusting with Jennifer Fugo. I'm your host, Danny Morshead, and today's webinar is made possible in part by an educational grant from Sanofi Regeneron. Our presenter today is Jennifer Fugo. Jennifer Fugo is a clinical nutritionist who has experience working with clients with a variety of skin conditions, including eczema. She holds a master's degree in human nutrition from the University of Bridgeport and is a licensed dietitian nutritionist and certified nutrition specialist. And with that, I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Jennifer Fugo.
Thank you, Danny. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm excited, everyone, that you made time to be here this evening. So I wanted to make sure, can everybody see my screen? Everything looks good, Danny? Because I can no longer see the chat. So
it's looking great to me, yeah.
Okay, perfect. I apologize. I can only see what I can see. So I'll just make this a little, maybe I'll fix this, center it a little bit more so it's easier for you guys to see. All right, so this evening we're going to be talking about eczema diet myth busting. This was a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I oftentimes find, and I feel your pain as well if you're in this boat, because I have been there, that we become afraid of certain things around us because we don't know what is a trigger, what causes flare-ups. And a lot of times we turn to diet. And I think diet can be a very important tool, but I think if we are lacking some guidelines and boundaries around what is sort of safe ideas about how to use diet to help your health, to help you support your skin, versus when we start to demonize things, that's where we can get into trouble. So I want to have a really nice, honest conversation about this evening. And I hope that this will be really, it'll be really inspiring for many of you to look at food a different way. So if we've never met before, my name is Jennifer Fugo. I'm the founder of a website called Skinterrupt. It's a mouthful, I know, but most of you may possibly know of my podcast called The Healthy Skin Show. And it was specifically created to support people who had various chronic skin problems find their way back to healthy skin, whether that means using diet, or botanicals and herbs or supplements or medications or a combination of all these things. We have those conversations and they're very science-based, clinical research-based, and we share a ton of information there. I'm also the lead clinical nutritionist at my own virtual practice called the Integrative Nutrition Group. And then like you, I am also an eczema thriver. I developed eczema back when I was in grad school that started around 2014. And I actually had dyshidrotic eczema on my hands. And that's what introduced me to this entire world of understanding the struggles and also the suffering that can come along with having eczema and not knowing what to do and feeling like you've run out of options. And so I invite you, if you want to connect offline or if you want to share some screenshots or something, I'm all over social media. My handle is Jennifer Fugo, and you can find me online elsewhere where I share lots of content. So just a quick disclaimer tonight before we get started. While I am a clinical nutritionist, I'm not a doctor or a medical professional. Everything that I discuss during our time together is for informational purposes only and is not intended to create nor replace the relationship that you have with your doctor. Nor does attending or watching this presentation create a client-practitioner relationship between you and I. Before making any changes, it's best to consult with a licensed medical professional. Any information used from this presentation is done so at your own risk. And please be aware, I work with adults, not children or babies. So the information and associated recommendations are really meant for adults. There are other practitioners out there who do work with children and babies, and some of the information will differ and vary based on where somebody is in their life cycle. So I just want to make sure that parents don't take something that I share here this evening and try to apply that to, say, like an infant. I just want to be very cautious about that. We always want to make sure that information is appropriate for where the patient is in their life. So to start things off, I want to acknowledge that diet is extremely important. So I am not, by sharing any of this information tonight, saying that you should discredit or not care about what your diet looks like. I do think that diet matters. And there is an interesting connection between diet, health, and even your atopic dermatitis or eczema. But I would caution you from strictly blaming food as the reason for flare-ups. It's really not the best approach. And I'm going to talk to you about why that is and show you that there are potential things that you can do. If you do really truly believe that diet is a factor, there are some things that you can do that might actually yield some good information that you can then apply to your particular situation that is safe and whatnot. And so we'll talk all about that this evening. So I want to discuss the complex relationship between food and eczema, what your gut has to do with all of this, the pros and cons of an elimination diet, because I know that many of you, if you especially have been on the internet or you've bought books, many of these books and resources suggest various elimination diets. So we'll talk about that, diet strategies to focus on so that you're looking at and fixating your actions on health versus fear, and then the action steps that you can begin to implement immediately. So I know that the very common sort of relationship that we develop with food is especially when we have eczema, and say, for example, you start to have a flare up, maybe it happens 30 minutes after food, maybe it happens while you're eating, maybe it happens the next day or 3 days later, and you start to wonder, is it something that I ate? Which is a natural thing, right? You take an action and then there's a consequence. And so we start to equate food, something we ate for nourishment, with a potential skin consequence. So your skin gets flared up, it gets redder, itchier, maybe it starts to burn. You have all of these symptoms. And we start to go, well, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. And we start to pick through all of these things. And then we begin to go online and we ask questions. And that's where we might become nervous about X, Y, Z. Maybe I should take these out. People tell you that they're eczema triggers or they're bad for eczema and you don't know what to believe, but obviously you want to get better. So there's a really slippery slope here. And so I get that diet can oftentimes feel like one of the most controllable levers that you're able to pull. For many of us, depending on where you are in your journey, you might have already eliminated all of the detergents and scents and harsh cleaning products in your environment. You've already swapped out your laundry detergent. Maybe some of you have already rehomed pets and taken all sorts of actions in your life to be able to better, hopefully, manage your skin. And so at the end of the day, when things might not be working well enough, we start to look to diet, because it is possible that diet could be a factor. And so, yes, it's very controllable. It's something that you can change what you buy, you can change what you eat. However, having a possible reaction to food does not necessarily mean that the reaction was triggered by the food itself. That is a very important point. It's because we have to ask, what else could be going on? Is it the food? Is it possibly an IgE food allergy? Is it possibly gut dysfunction? Is it possibly the gut microbiome? It may not be the actual food. It could be something else, how the food interacts with your body. And that's where we want to start digging around for clues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how these are all connected. So let's start a little bit with understanding the GI tract, because when we eat, it is so integral that basically the I would say 2,000-foot view is that you eat food, it's broken down sequentially into smaller pieces as it goes further and deeper into the digestive system. And we absorb the smallest fragments of it, not whole pieces. So for example, when you eat protein, proteins must be broken down into their individual amino acids, and then they are absorbed. If that process gets hijacked At any point, there is no backup. And so we do not absorb those nutrients. And so those nutrients can end up interacting with the gut microbiome. They can be eliminated entirely. And so we start to see deficiencies occur with time, things like that. So let's talk a little bit about this whole process of gut function. Gut function is this conglomeration of 3 different key steps, which is digestion, absorption, and elimination. Digestion is what I just described. We're breaking things down into the smallest fragments possible so that during the absorption phase, our body is able to extract that nutrition potential from the food and then be able to reassemble it however it needs, send nutrients, send the building blocks wherever we need in the body in order to do a variety of things. And then elimination is eliminating waste in a proper manner. So I'm not going to go into like the Bristol stool chart or anything like that, but I will just say this about elimination. You should be having a bowel movement at least once every day. If you are not, that is an indication that you are constipated. And constipation means that things, specifically the stool, so it's partly food waste, fiber, some fluids, a huge bulk of the gut microbiome and other toxins and such that are produced just naturally by our gut microbiome are being eliminated. And so we need to eliminate every single day. I understand that some have probably read or heard that you don't have to go to the bathroom every single day, but it actually is crucial that you have a bowel movement every single day. And if you don't, that means that stool is moving too slowly through the GI tract. So take a look at something called the Bristol stool chart. That can help you understand what consistency of stool is ideal. Typically, that's a number 3 or number 4 on the Bristol stool chart. And ideally, we want to have 1 to 3 bowel movements a day. If you are not, and you're having more than that, that would be on the diarrhea side versus the constipation side. Either way, we want to try to use different, I'll just call them tools, in order to help try to get things back to that healthy balance of having a healthy, formed, easy to pass stool 1 to 3 times a day. Okay. Now, in the process of all of this, we have something in our stomach called stomach acid. Some of you may have heard of this. Maybe you're using some sort of digestive enzyme or some sort of digestive aid that contains something called betaine HCl. So betaine HCl is additional stomach acid that we can supplement with. And so stomach acid plays 2 crucial roles in this whole process. Well, 1 crucial role, and then the second is it being a chemical barrier. So the first thing it does is it aids in digestion, specifically with protein, and it also breaks protein apart from specific nutrients like vitamin B12 and iron. And then the second role, which is equally important and kind of goes with the microbiome, is that it acts as a chemical barrier. So stomach acid is so acidic, it's usually around a pH of 1, that it will kill, well, that's part of its role. It's supposed to kill anything that comes down the digestive tube. So anytime you swallow something, whether it's from water you drank or something you ate or just swallowing your own saliva, which, believe it or not, you actually have a microbiome unique to your mouth. So there's tons of bacteria living in your mouth and other organisms. Every time you swallow just saliva or inhale something that gets caught in the saliva and you swallow it down, it's supposed to die in the stomach. And that's partly a protective barrier so that things don't make their way into the GI tract that really shouldn't be there and could cause harm. And then again, it's supposed to break things down so your body can then go through this whole digestive absorption process. But as I was saying before, there is no backup system to this. So if you have a depletion of stomach acid, now digestion is compromised, as is that chemical barrier feature of the stomach and everything further down. It's almost like a super highway. I like to think of it like that. It's almost like one car accident in the stomach causes issues all the way down because there's no backup system. So understanding if we have sufficient stomach acid and if we have enough of the other steps in digestion and absorption, that they are there sufficiently, is really crucial, because we can't skip steps and we don't have anything as a backup. So that's why it's so important, if you are interested in, say, looking at your gut and looking at the gut connection between your skin and what could be going on, you can't just hone in on one tiny little area and go, oh, I think I have small intestine bacterial overgrowth. You have to zoom out and ask why that's happening. Or, oh, somebody told me I have this, or I have this test that shows that. We still need to zoom out and look at the whole system to make sure that we can find a way to balance it appropriately. So truly an important process. And then we get to the gut microbiome. Oops. Sorry about that, skipped forward a little bit. And so the gut microbiome is this conglomeration of organisms that live throughout the GI tract. And you can see this neat little graphic that I've shared on Instagram in the past. Our stomach does have a tiny, small amount of organisms living there. It's really hard for organisms to live in the stomach, to be honest, because it's so acidic, as I said. So we've got a little bit of strep, a little bit of lactobacillus. We have this organism, this bacteria that I like to call problem child, called H. pylori. And not everyone has this. It is a very common in what can be described as an infection, but it is something that I think generally should be identified if you do have it, because it will reduce stomach acid. It can be a reason that we don't have that chemical barrier sufficiently, and we can also start to see nutrient depletions as a result if you do have it. And then we've got the small intestine. Now, you should have some organisms living there, some bacteria. It's not, I've read some things in the past that the small intestine was thought to be like a sterile environment, and it's not. There are a much smaller amount of bacteria that live there, and also fungus, so different organisms that are in the fungi family. So things like Candida, they live normally up in the small intestine. And then you have the large intestine or colon, where you have the bulk of the gut microbiome. That's where we see all of those diverse strains. So we have stool tests that look at all of these different things, but they can't even test and show you everything that's there. We just simply do not have that capacity at this point in time. But the point is that it is a diverse community of different types of organisms that are there to live symbiotically with you. And we do need them. We should not have a sterile environment there. And they communicate with us through their waste products, and we communicate with them. So there's this really interesting interplay between us and the microbiome that is so crucially important. The other factor that you might have gone, oh wait, Jen also said this, they interact with food, because when certain things make it down into the colon, that's where we can start to either have problems where, for example, if proteins, so let's go back up to the stomach for a moment. Say you have low stomach acid because you have H. pylori, we're not properly breaking down our proteins into those amino acids. So it's sort of like a pearl necklace. We want to clip apart all of the different pearls into the small amino acid strand, right? So we've got each little pearl is an amino acid. Well, that doesn't happen. So now we have this larger protein that makes its way to the colon because none of those amino acids were separated and thus absorbed. And now you have bacteria fermenting protein, which they're not supposed to ferment. And that is a process known as putrefaction, which is actually very, it's not great. It's not great. Let's put it that way. So again, this is why I said each step is really, really important. And it might not be that you're reacting to, let's just say it's like beef or chicken. It may be that there's something going on in the process of what's happening in the digestive system that you think and relate to as, oh, it was the beef, it was the this, it was the that, but it's actually the fact that it wasn't broken down correctly. It is intermingling with organisms that it normally wouldn't have intermingled with. And now you have this putrefaction or some sort of inflammatory interaction between the microbiome and what is there. And so now you can see why this is a lot more complicated. And I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by this, but I want you to see that it's just a much more complex topic. So when we get to elimination diets, right, the natural thing is like, oh, well, I'll take the food out. I'll see what happens. And I think that yes, elimination diets can be incredibly helpful. They can be a really therapeutic nutrition tool, but we also have to have guardrails. And part of those guardrails in using these safely, and I'll show you the reason why I talk about using them safely, is because of what can happen when they're not used safely. And I can also share like a clinical story of what happened, what I've seen happen to clients with eczema who have taken foods out for too long of a period of time. There can be some really not great consequences. And I don't share this to scare anyone, but I do share this to educate you because most people wish they knew this before they actually eliminated any foods and did acknowledge that they would have probably made different choices had they known this information, right? I feel like anytime we go into anything, knowing the pros and the cons allows us to make the best decision for ourselves, not just do what somebody else tells us to do. So an elimination diet, according to WebMD, is defined as a meal plan that avoids or removes certain foods or ingredients, so you can find out what you might be sensitive to or allergic to. And so I'm sure many of you have seen, like I said, there's diet books, there's tons of information online. You go into Facebook groups, I am in many of them, and it is sometimes overwhelming. I have honestly seen many people say, I feel like my diet is going to end up becoming air. They don't know what to eat after everyone gives all their suggestions of what to cut out. And that can be extremely overwhelming. There are so many different iterations of elimination diets. There's literally the eczema diet. There is the more plant-based vegan options. There's low FODMAPs. So FODMAPs, if you're not aware, are fermentable fibers that they're not just found in plants. So like lactose, for example, which is found in some dairy, is also a FODMAP. We have low salicylate diet. So reducing the salicylate content. There's a lot of misunderstandings about that. And I'll talk about some of the things that some of these diets can mean when they work or when they don't work as we go along. And then we have paleo, AIP or autoimmune protocol, keto, carnivore, where if you're not familiar with this, you've cut out all plant foods and you're just eating animal foods. That's it. So it's like meat, butter, shellfish. I mean, that's pretty much what you're eating, fish, that kind of stuff. So there's really no plant foods, very low fiber. And then we've got gluten-free, the Candida diet or anti-Candida diet. We have the low histamine diet. And then we could get into like egg-free, as a dairy-free, soy-free, nut-free. I mean, we could go down so many different rabbit holes here. And that's why it's tricky, because sometimes you'll try one thing and it'll kind of work, or it'll make you worse. And then you're confused about what foods are safe. Also, I just want to throw out there that it is not a healthy idea to consider overlapping any of these diets together. I mean, you really have to be careful. I think it's okay, like gluten's one thing, and dairy may be another thing. But when you're taking out huge amounts of food, like you're going plant-based plus gluten-free, plus you're doing a more like low histamine option, you're really eliminating massive amounts of food. And so we want to be cautious here because we need nourishment. We need this nourishment. It is crucial. And so let's talk about the pros and cons of elimination diets. So first of all, the pro is that they are therapeutic tools, but they do have to be used appropriately. They can, for some of them, improve nutrient density, especially if you go into it and you say, okay, well, I'm going to reduce processed foods out of my diet, and I'm going to look toward more whole foods-based options. I think that that is certainly an admirable and acceptable thing to do. We're adding or increasing nutrient density so that we hopefully are getting access to those nutrients. It also can reduce foods that might be described by some as quote unquote inflammatory. things that might be really high in sugar, very fried foods, foods that that might have like trans fats in them, or super processed foods, things like that. I don't honestly like to use the word inflammatory or toxic, because I do find, and even clean eating, I do find that those tend to activate the fear part of the way we interact with food. And I do find that, especially for those who've been dealing, if you have a past history with an eating disorder, or you're struggling with disordered eating now, is not really all that helpful. But either way, we can also possibly identify some trigger foods. It may help us identify a possible allergy at times, or to test out whether certain types of testing are accurate or not. It can also help us make connections between different body systems. But some of the cons these are pretty significant. Number one, you cannot heal your gut by doing an elimination diet. I don't care what blog you read. I don't care what book you read. You cannot heal your gut. We'll put that in air quotes. You cannot heal your gut from doing an elimination diet. That does not work. It is not a thing. It does not work. So just get that out of your head, so that you don't go into this thinking that your gut's going to magically be better if you take out these foods. That is not accurate. I think there's a beauty to the food is medicine movement, which I completely love and agree with. However, there are limitations. And this is one area that we way oversold on that front about 10 years ago, in more like the integrative and functional space. So you cannot heal your gut from doing elimination diets. It also, as I said, the more you eliminate, the more you reduce nutrient density. And when you eliminate too many things, that can really drop the amount of nutrients that you get access to. It also, by dropping nutrient diversity, will also impact and reduce gut diversity, so gut microbiome diversity. So this has it's a twofold impact. You can also develop a fear of food and lose enjoyment in mealtime altogether, which is, to me, very, very sad, because mealtime, especially, like, food is nourishment. That's ultimately what it is. It also is connection. It's what brings us together. Remember thinking of, like, you're eating with friends or family or whatever, and we all like to eat at a meal. We like to be together at a meal. We commune at a meal. And when you sit there alone, not being able to eat anything while everyone else enjoys things, it feels extremely isolating. And it can make you feel like you don't even want to be there. So we want to be very cautious of not getting on that slippery slope where this can happen. It can obviously exacerbate existing nutrient insufficiencies such that they would become deficiencies. And you can develop increased food reactivity and even IgE allergies. And I share this because, as I said, I actually have had several clients this has happened to, and we're seeing this increasing more and more, where people have never had reactions to foods, took them out because someone online, they read in a book, I don't know, told them that these foods were quote unquote bad for eczema or trigger foods for eczema. And they had them out somewhere around a year or more, like really strictly avoided the foods. And what we see, it's not in everyone, but some people, when they try to reintroduce, now develop an actual IgE allergy where they now need an EpiPen for exposure to those foods. And if you are an adult, it is extremely hard to unfortunately walk that allergy back. If you're a child, there is a lot more options. As an adult, it's a lot more difficult, and it is very devastating to be in that situation. So be very, very cautious with how long you cut foods out, because that is a potential consequence, unfortunately, that we are seeing more and more. It also, these diets are not appropriate for those with a history of eating disorders, whether it is active or inactive. And if you do have a history of an eating disorder, and say you work with a practitioner or a nutritionist or someone, and you do not feel comfortable doing this, please advocate for yourself. You always have the right to say no, always. You can say, I do not feel comfortable doing this elimination diet. I have a history of X. This is very triggering for me. I am not comfortable. Can we go another way? So we want to be very cautious with this. And I will also say that as a practitioner myself, I feel a responsibility that if I do suggest to a client, which is not that frequent, but if I do suggest to a client that they should eliminate something, I also am, I feel, taking responsibility for hopefully reintroducing that food back into that client's diet, helping them know how to do that, giving them the instruction. And that oftentimes is missing with other. So we want to be careful. I love, and I work in the world of integrative nutrition, but unfortunately, there is a lack of this final step of onboarding the foods again. And that is ultimately that person's responsibility who recommended you take it out. So ask them up front, are you planning on helping me reintroduce these foods? How will we do that? Because you probably don't know how to do that. There is skill behind that. So it's okay to ask that up front. So the reason that I say this, because I used to get called a fear mongerer for like the last 2.5 years. Every time I would say, I'm noticing that people in my community are coming into my practice with an exceptional amount of disordered eating. They're so afraid of food. And to me, this is heartbreaking because they've lost that joy to this whole process of being able to engage with and appreciate food. And so I connected with a research team at UC Davis, and we actually did a survey of over 600 people who were dealing with chronic skin conditions that ranged anywhere from we definitely have atopic dermatitis, folks, but psoriasis, hidradenitis suppurativa, acne, all sorts of stuff. And so we asked them specific questions. And this paper, which I actually have on my website, and I actually did a whole podcast episode on it talking about the results. It was published this past summer. But this paper is called The Effects of Food Elimination Diets for Dermatologic Conditions on Physical and Mental Health. And the whole point of this was to ask these people, A, who recommended that you remove foods? Did you do an elimination diet, and who recommended this? Was it self-elimination? So either like you read a book or somebody told you online, and so you did it yourself. What foods did you eliminate? And then we also looked at age brackets in terms of the relationship with food. So we asked this one specific question that we started to get some fascinating information on. Did an elimination diet trigger a negative association with food? So I'm just showing you two blown up parts of the graph here. So if we look at the grid or the chart on the left, just to give you some context, green is strongly agree and blue is agree. Okay, so that's what you really want to focus on. And so this chart on the left shows the answers to this question broken down by age groups. The one at the top is 18 to 24-year-olds. And so did an elimination diet trigger a negative association with food? I personally find it alarming that over 82% of 18 to 24-year-olds now have a negative association with food. Now, granted, we do see that start to come down, right, as people get older. However, when we still get down to that 55 to 64-year-old bracket, it's still over 47% of people. That is really disturbing and upsetting. Then we also asked people if they had a history of an eating disorder or not. And so you can see it's broken into 4 lines on the right: anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, and then no history. And what we found is that of all 4 graphs, over 50% said that an elimination diet did trigger a negative association with food. So here's the thing. This is my takeaway. This is sort of like my big thing. Just because, say you do all this work and you give up all these foods and maybe your skin clears up, it's not like the fear of food just magically disappears. It's something that we carry with us. And then you have to deal with that. I don't think the price of your health should be this piece of your mental and emotional health. That's just my feeling. I'm not saying that these diets don't have a time and a place, but I do think we need to use caution with, number one, how long we put anyone on, or someone chooses to go on it themselves, and number two, how extensive the restrictions are, and number three, making sure that there is an off ramp. And that is what is drastically missing right now. So I'm just gonna do a little true or false here. And I know it was easier when I did this at Eczema Expo because everybody was in the room and they raised their hand or shouted out true or false. But when it comes to things like, the idea that the more foods you eliminate, the healthier you become, this is very false. There is no correlation between this and health. The more you eliminate, decreases diet diversity, it decreases nutrient diversity, and can absolutely impair your health and impair the health of your skin, amongst other body systems. The idea that certain foods are bad for eczema, like eggs or dairy, gluten, sugar, nightshades. I mean, we could go on and on about this. I have not actually seen that clinically. I don't think that any foods specifically are bad. I don't like that language, and it's inaccurate. I have plenty of clients that over the years who have had eczema and were able to eat eggs or dairy. Some can eat gluten. Some are fine with like normal amounts of sugar, like having a couple pieces of chocolate a day and eating fruit, and just like, you're not going crazy. It's not like you're eating dessert three times a day, but like normal amounts they're fine with. Or nightshades. I mean, again, everybody is different. So I do not buy into this idea that there's one or some subset of bad foods for eczema. I also do not believe that your diet is 100% to blame for eczema or your most recent flare. The only time that may be different is if it is actually triggering an IgE food allergy. That could be different. Doing a detox or a cleanse or even a fast to reset your gut is not accurate. That's not what it does. So be very cautious in how things are marketed to you, that certain components of food are toxic, like salicylates or FODMAPs, which again are those fermentable fibers, oxalates or lectins. Again, this is not true. Salicylates can be processed through actually your liver detox pathways. It's not a gut sensitivity. It's actually a sign of a glycine and B6 deficiency, believe it or not, because that's where salicylates as a food chemical are processed. FODMAPs, if we're reactive to them, can be a sign that there is some sort of potential overgrowth or dysbiosis or imbalance within the GI tract of certain types of bacteria that ferment these types of fibers. Oxalates should actually be broken down by your digestive system. We have bacteria the family is called Oxalobacter that break them down in the GI tract. And lectins, don't even get me started on that. That has been, there's so many lectins ubiquitous throughout the food supply. And at this point, I think that's actually been shown at this point that it's really not as helpful as most people have claimed it was several years ago. And then lastly, if an elimination diet is helping to control your eczema, you need to stay on it for life. And that's not necessarily true. The only times that would be true is if it's, again, an IgE allergy, you have celiac disease, so you need to avoid gluten, or you have some other condition that would make it necessary for you to avoid something. But having food sensitivities or food intolerances, which are much different from an IgE food allergy, is extremely important to differentiate. And those eliminations really should not be used for life. We should work on reintegrating foods back into the diet. And if we're not able to, we need to ask why. So let's talk about strategies to try. So again, always ask why. If a diet worked or it didn't work, ask why. Why did that happen? Become curious, because we can actually derive information from these different types of diets. So for example, and this is again based on my clinical experience, but if you found that going vegan or plant-based was actually helpful, I have found that most people who have taken that step and like it cleared up their skin or their skin got better was because they had low stomach acid. Many of those, not all, but many had an H. pylori infection hidden under there, and that caused a huge amount of gut dysfunction and then gut microbiome issues as well. So, again, ask why if it helped. Low FODMAP, if taking out those fermentable starches helps, again, it could be a sign that there is overgrowth within the GI tract, whether it is up in the small intestine or in the large intestine, sometimes both. If a salicylate diet helps, again, that is a sign of nutrient depletions. Not that salicylates are bad. You can have an actual allergy to salicylates, like some people can actually have an IgE reaction to aspirin, but that is extremely rare. It's not a normal thing. So if it's just a sensitivity, that's usually what it means, is we have this depletion of key nutrients that are required to process salicylates appropriately. Again, oxalates, we should be able to break those down thanks to the oxalobacter family that lives in the GI tract. If keto is working or if it's not working, we need to ask why. Carnivore, same thing. We're taking out oftentimes a lot of plant foods. It also drastically increases your protein intake, but it also does have a pretty intense impact to the gut microbiome after about, I would say, 6 months, that can be very difficult to deal with afterwards. It makes it really, really hard to reintroduce plant foods. If gluten-free works, we need to ask, is there the possibility that there's celiac disease? Is it aggravating because there is an extreme state of gut permeability or leaky gut that this is just perpetuating? A candida diet is not an effective way to deal with candida, by the way. You can't starve yeast. They're really, really hardy, unfortunately. So I don't, if it is helping you, it could be an indication that there is some sort of imbalance within the gut microbiome between the bacteria and the fungus, but I would find other ways that are more effective to deal with it than just trying to starve them through food. And again, if a low histamine diet is helping, that's great. Not all eczema is histamine driven, by the way. So it does not mean that everybody with eczema should go on a low histamine diet. This is a very restrictive diet that is hard to be on long term. If it's helping, then we want to ask what is destabilizing mast cells and look at all possible options to try and help you deal with that so that you then can reintroduce higher histamine foods. In terms of general diet strategy, I think a variety of nutrients is key. If you want to take like a screenshot or something of this, just because so that way you'll have some targets here. I think protein is king. A minimum for adults should be 70 to 80 grams a day. And so you could break that into 3 meals. You could have some at snacks. I don't care, but just spread across the day. Fiber is queen, 30 to 35 grams a day. Fat and carbs are kind of like their kids. You have them in smaller quantities, but you don't have to go low carb. That's not what I'm suggesting. It just shouldn't be the bulk of your plate. Don't forget about your vitamins, your minerals, and other micronutrients. And I just say this because we are a nutrient consumption factory, not a nutrient production factory. We have to take nutrients in from food and possibly supplements when appropriate. So important. Reduce processed foods, refined sugars, fried foods. You have that one time, like, don't beat yourself up, but like it shouldn't be an everyday thing, right? We want to focus on adding in healthier foods rather than taking everything away. Also keep in mind seasonality. So eating with the seasons. So for example, right now in the Northern Hemisphere, it's going into late fall. Pumpkin is the thing, right? I wouldn't exactly eat like watermelon right now. It doesn't grow right now, at least where I live. So think about what's available seasonally for you at any given time. You should also take into account your age, your current health status, your goals. So if you're trying to, for example, put on a bunch of muscle and you like to work out a lot or whatever, that should be factored into your nutrition, your microbiome, and also what medications that you're on. And then consider thinking about the different labels or educating yourself on what they mean: organic versus conventionally grown versus grass-fed versus vegetarian fed versus pasture raised, non-GMO, wild caught. There's all these labels, and we can just make smarter choices when we understand what these mean. And then lastly, consider looking at regenerative farming. There's a lot of farmers out there that cannot afford to go get the organic certification, but they farm in a regenerative manner, and it's actually beyond what organic even is. So you might find that farmers around you or near you may be actually regenerative, but they're not legally allowed to call themselves organic. And I would almost argue they're superior to those that are just following the guidelines set forth for organic certification. Now, if you are confused about what a gram is, don't worry. I am too. I don't know what a gram looks like. It's a very confusing thing. It's really more about this sort of weight, so to speak. And we were never taught that. It's okay. So I put together this little cheat sheet for you. Again, if you want to take a screenshot of it, it gives you some practical ways to learn to eyeball how much protein you're consuming. So for example, once you go, okay, 1 egg is equal to 6 grams of protein. So then you know if you ate 2 eggs or 3 eggs, you had 12 grams or 18 grams, right? So this makes it easier rather than having you weigh your food. I'm not going to weigh my food. So I learned how to eyeball things. And so I hope that this chart is helpful for you. I've got the plant-based options on one side and animal-based on the other. And it's a really useful tool that I share with clients. And so a couple of things to keep in mind. Diet ships and nutritive supplements can be used with medication. So it's okay if you're currently using steroids or antihistamines, if you're on a biologic or a JAK inhibitor, and even immunosuppressants. You can do diet and more integrative things with medications. There is no reason that you have to do one or the other. That's very much black and white thinking that is not oftentimes helpful. And so we want to say, what can we do now with where we are? What tools do we have access to? Now, that being said, the only one caveat with immunosuppressants like cyclosporin is you do have to be careful with herbal supplements because some actually interact with it negatively in how it's processed through your liver. So that's the one thing you do need to be cautious on if you're working with someone and they're not familiar with that. They may provide you herbs if they don't know that can cause an issue with how cyclosporin is processed, so how long it will linger in the system or how quickly it will be metabolized. So we do want to be cautious around that. And then elimination diets, again, should not be used endlessly. Our exception is like IgE food allergies, celiac disease, that kind of stuff. So rule of thumb, extreme care must be taken with babies and growing children when doing elimination diets. Be very, very careful. Children pick up also on what they see adults doing. So again, this is why we want to be cautious in our language, not using bad versus good versus toxic or clean or inflammatory. We want to be cautious of language, but also in how we introduce foods to children. And the more you take out, the more you can contribute to issues with their development and growth. Be careful cutting out a lot of foods at the same time. It can be confusing as to what helped, and then you'll get to a place where you're afraid to reintroduce anything. And really, if you do an elimination diet, if after a month there's no improvement, try to reintroduce foods. I would start with ones that are not the top 9 IgE allergens. They just added sesame. So it used to be top 8. It's now top 9 food allergies. So with the inclusion of sesame now. So I would start with anything that was not a top 9 allergen and then eventually work up to those, again, assuming you have no known IgE reactions to those foods. So those are things you do not reintroduce. If you're becoming increasingly sensitive sensitive or reactive to foods and you can't reintroduce them, please get help from a professional. Don't just stay stuck in that situation. We have to figure out what's going on. That's not a good thing, because I have actually worked with clients that have whittled their way down to 5 foods and they eat the same 5 foods every day. And that is not a healthy state to be in. The goal should always be to reintroduce as many foods as quickly as possible, but you don't just reintroduce everything at the same time. So your immediate action steps are focus on adding back in healthy whole foods rather than cutting things out. Measure your protein intake. So if you're not sure how much protein you eat, I already gave you the goalpost, right? So that's 70 to 80 grams minimum. So what you can do is you can go to MyFitnessPal or Chronometer.com. It's free, and you can track your protein over the course of 3 to 5 days. Don't pay attention to the calories or anything like that. And if it is, I understand if it's triggering because of past history with food, totally get it. But if this is okay for you to do, get an average of what your protein intake is, and then you know what you got to do to improve. Because at least if you know, I'm only hitting like 45 grams a day, now you know you've really got to ratchet it up and you know what you need to potentially add in to hit that target. Also, look at your full body symptoms rather than just fixating on skin alone. Revisit those past reactions or results from different elimination diets, especially if you've tried one or more of these diets in the past. Consider what they could have been telling you. What information could you have derived from them rather than just saying, oh, it didn't work, or oh, I just got really better and I stuck with it. Why? That question is so powerful. If you've already eliminated foods, we always reintroduce one at a time, not all at the same time, one at a time. And if you're really struggling with food fear, please get help. This is not something that you're just going to fix on your own. It is a really serious struggle. It's something that I have dealt with personally. So ask for help. The only two, I'd say, types of designations of practitioners who work with diet are clinical nutritionists like myself. So CNS is the designation, or a registered dietitian, an RD. There is no other nutrition professional, and even, unfortunately, doctors do not get nutrition training unless that's something that they have actively sought out. So their scope of practice may have had no training in nutrition, but clinical nutritionist implies that you have at least a 4-year bachelor's degree or a 2-year master's degree with 1,000 clinical hours that are observed. And you've gone through testing, all sorts of stuff to prove competency. Whereas RDs are in a kind of similar vein and have a lot of similar training. We are the only two in the United States that have this type of training to be able to work with diet directly. Anybody else with other like functional qualifications, health coaching, etc., actually are not allowed to work with diet. It's actually outside of their scope of practice and it's not taught in their training. So just an FYI, be cautious of who you work with to make sure that they do truly understand the nuances of all of this. And then lastly, I've got the Healthy Skin Show. So if you're looking for a really great resource, we have over 300 episodes. There's many people that you'll probably recognize who've been on the show, who shared their story or shared information. I'm on Instagram. We have the whole entire show up on YouTube. So if you want to watch like us actually talk with our expressions and everything and different visual examples, you can check out the episodes there. And then obviously I have my website, Skinterrupt, or you can just go healthyskinshow.com and find it just the same. So I hope that we will connect, but thank you guys so much for having me. I know we have a couple of minutes left for questions. And so let me know what you guys need guidance with. I'm happy to answer.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. We have just a few minutes for questions, so we'll see if we can get to a handful of them here. So I'll start us right off. Does histamine intolerance or eating high histamine foods affect your gut health?
So eating high histamine foods does not impact your gut health. Eating a low histamine diet could impact your gut health in that it could possibly decrease the type of nutrients that your gut needs to thrive. However, if you have an issue with histamine, using a low histamine diet would be required as possibly part and sort of like the nuanced, like how sensitive you are to histamine, so how extensive the diet would be, might be a band-aid while you work on what's actually driving the excess levels of histamine in the system. Because it's not just allergies. There's a whole gut microbiome component to low histamine. There's actually organisms that can either destabilize mast cells that cause them to spill out histamine into the system, or they actually produce histamine in the GI tract. And it's so much that your DAO enzyme, or diamine oxidase, which is the only enzyme in the GI tract to break histamine down, just can't deal with the massive load. So there's a huge, it's a much bigger question, but no, it can't wreck your gut health. It's also not going to fix your gut either. It's a band-aid and a bridge.
Great. Maybe two more questions here. When you eat certain foods and throw up after, could that be an allergy or a problem with the gut?
Yes. So that could absolutely be a sign of an allergy. I would talk to an allergist. I would talk to an allergist and definitely a gastroenterologist. There could be issues with gastroparesis as well. So I would definitely go see at least one of those specialists. You might have to see both and identify what's going on. That's not a normal response.
Great. And I'm just going to ask one more question here, but I'll remind everyone that for all those questions we didn't get to answer, we have a podcast called Eczema Answered, where we answer your questions with eczema experts. So keep an eye out for your questions there. So last question for you. Do drinks like kombucha make a significant impact on the gut microbiome?
I think they can be helpful. Again, assuming you don't have a histamine issue because they're high in histamine. I also don't totally love them if you have like really bad fungal overgrowth, not my favorite thing to consume, but you do need, in order for fermented foods like kombucha to be helpful, you need to consume 4 to 6 servings of it a day. So I don't think consuming that much kombucha is realistic, because it also is extremely acidic and it can degrade the enamel on your teeth. So I think it's great to think about diversifying your fermented foods if you tolerate them, but 4 to 6 servings a day is what is shown in research to be clinically significant. Now, if you have taken lots of antibiotics and you have like a really significantly depleted gut, are fermented foods alone going to fix that? No, that is probiotic and probably high dose probiotic categories. So they're helpful on a normal basis as long as you tolerate them.
Great. Okay, that's all the time we had for questions. You had so many great questions. We're sorry we couldn't get to more of them. But thank you so much to Jennifer for helping us bust some of those eczema diet myths. And many thanks to you all for joining us today. You can continue your eczema education on our website at nationaleczema.org. And you may register for an upcoming webinar or watch the recording of a previous webinar, including this one, at nationaleczema.org/webinar-Wednesdays. On behalf of the National Eczema Association, thank you so much to you all for joining us.